This is the CBC Evening News.
Good evening. I am Ryan Broom with the Saturday, September 30th edition of the CBC Evening News. In our top story, sexual harassment legislation will be tabled in Parliament next month. The news came today as the Democratic Labour Party resumed its Facts Mission mass canvass exercise in St. George South. Former representative of the constituency and the party's candidate in the next general election, Labour Minister Senator Dr. Esther Bayer-Saku, made the rounds going through the constituency along with some senior members of the party. Noting it was a privilege to be selected to represent the party in St. George South again, she says the coming month will be significant for both constituents and Barbadians in general when the sexual harassment legislation is tabled.
Before I even entered politics, as you may know, I was a doctor for this community. And it was there I became aware of sexual harassment as a real problem for workers, a real problem that affected the stress at work and the productivity at work. And so I made it my goal that if I accomplished nothing else as Minister of Labour, I was going to bring the sexual harassment legislation. And I want to thank the Attorney General and my staff at the Ministry of Labour, and to say to the members of this community that we are bringing sexual harassment legislation so that that problem that they've battled with in silence, they will now be able to address.
The minister adds that the final draft has gone through several amendments, taking into consideration the concerns and views of men's and women's groups and other interested associations and individuals.
I will be speaking more on the sexual harassment legislation. Yes, I will be debating it in the Senate in the next 2 weeks, but also I think I'll be moving around Barbados to speak more about it, what it is and what it isn't. Because there's some people who are glad, those persons who may consider themselves victims, they're glad that we're bringing it. But then for others, there's still a lot of questions. Will it affect how they look at members of the opposite sex? Will it affect their day-to-day demeanor? And we need to ensure that folks are not afraid of it, but that they understand that it really is for the protection of workers. It is for the protection of the more vulnerable.
In other news, the Labour Minister is hopeful that a swift resolution can be reached in the ongoing impasse involving the CBC and the Barbados Workers' Union.
I always maintain hope that everything can be resolved. It just needs us to come back to the table. From where I sit, it seems to be a genuine misunderstanding with what was put on the table at the time and what was understood by both sides. So at some point, the parties, as happens with every negotiation, there's going to have to be a movement one way or another. And when the parties are ready for this movement, I'm there to continue. I continue to maintain contact with both sides to see if I can bring them to the table earlier. But at any rate, when they're ready to come to the table, I'm more than willing to help us to get this resolved.
Preserving jobs at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation is a major objective for the CBC, even though it continues to face financial difficulties. So says General Manager Doug Hoyt, speaking in the wake of 4 days of industrial action by some employees of the corporation. The CBC boss pointed to substantial subscriber losses in the MCTV division and overall declines in advertising revenue in the past 2 years. But he said because they have been able to manage operating costs, not a single employee has been sent home.
We're challenged by the media pie. There are more hands trying to get a slice of a pie which has gotten no bigger. We're challenged by competitive forces, point of sale display, and social media in terms of advertising.
Mr. Hoyt said the CBC was in the process of retooling some of its prime time programming and embarking on some major revenue initiatives to further combat losses, but he was concerned that union demands for payments to employees outside of the scale could significantly hurt the national broadcaster.
Let me put it in perspective. There's some 68 employees out of the complement of 246 here at the CBC who would be impacted by an extension or going over the scales. That's some 27% of our workforce. Now, if those employees were to be given a salary increase, then the other 70% would have every right to come back to CBC and say, what about us? How could you give those 68 employees a salary increase? We would be entitled to one as well. That is part of the challenge that we face. But I want to apologize today to all employees for the situation that we now face. I hope that we could have a speedy resolution to this impasse and we could get on with the business of making the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation the brightest media light in the Caribbean.
The CBC has an accumulated deficit of more than $124 million and has recorded a net loss of nearly $4 million at the end of August 2017. Acting Commissioner of Police Tyrone Griffith has been appointed to the post of Commissioner of Police with effect from tomorrow, Sunday, October 1st. Mr. Griffith joined the police force in 1975. He was Assistant Commissioner of Police before being elevated to Acting Commissioner in 2013, after taking over from former Commissioner of Police Darwin Dotton. We take a pause here, but we'll have more news after the break.
Community Files.
The Barbados Cultural Industries Development Authority is inviting stakeholders to a discussion to examine the best approach to recommendations that have been made for the cultural industries. The discussion will take place on Wednesday, October 4th at the Lloyd Erskine Sandiford Centre, 2 Mile Hill, St. Michael, from 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. For more information and to register, please visit www.cedabarbados.org. Seating is on a first-come, first-served basis.
Do you want audience numbers? Over 140,000 people are watching Morning Barbados and the evening news. 6 out of 10 top radio personalities are found right here at the CBC. CBC delivers the audience you need.
Put some of the senior guys back.
Welcome back. Well, by year end, Barbados is likely to see another record high number of long-stay visitor arrivals. This revelation from Minister of Tourism Richard Seeley, who attributes the success to programs introduced by local tourism agencies.
Visitor arrivals in 2016 was at the level of 632,000. That, of course, was over the 2015 record of 592,000. Year to date, we're 8.5% up, and there's nothing that suggests that we will not finish this year in that general vicinity.
Minister Seeley made the comments during the weekly Astor B. Watts Lunchtime Lecture. In light of the latest downgrade by rating agency Standard & Poor's, the minister says government has done its part to create an enabling environment for investors who should in turn look beyond the country's investment grade.
And I am certain that on this track, in the fullness of time, we will start to see the investment, the rating agencies look at us differently. But I think that I'm not going to say we should ignore it. But at the same time, I think that if you look at the total picture, tourism can still continue to meet and surpass its targets in the face of what the rating agencies might be saying.
A new performing arts category has been added to this year's National Independence Festival of Creative Arts, or NIFCA. Currently, NIFCA recognizes excellence in 7 disciplines: dance, theater, music, literary arts, visual arts and photography, culinary arts, and film and video. Senior Business Development Officer at the National Cultural Foundation, Alison Seeley-Smith, says the new semi-professional category was added after an in-depth analysis of the last 10 years of its performing arts component.
That analysis considered the academic as well as the applied growth and the development of the artists in these specific disciplines during that period, and it was tailored to elevate the status of artists who have begun to advance their skill sets, but for whom it was deemed they haven't yet reached the defined professional level. And therefore, an additional category has been created this year in the performing arts disciplines, allowing for artists of like status to be adjudicated on the same level as their peers.
public forum was held in June about the new category. Participants in music, dance, and theater now performing in the soon-to-be-concluded preliminary stage will be competing in 3 categories this year: non-professional, the new semi-professional category, and professional. Ms. Seeley Smith says the objective is to create a clear path of advancement for new artists entering the NIFCA Performing Arts.
Now we're moving them through these tiers of development from junior to non-professional to professional. And in between, the semi-professional, as they further develop themselves within their related fields. The intention is that through this process, they'll be able to measure their growth against the criteria provided and against standards set within the Barbadian cultural industries. And what's also new this year with the new category is that there's a new prize. And the prize that's up for grabs in this semi-professional category is a BIMAP year-long course of study for a certificate in management studies awarded to the highest scoring individuals in all of those 3 disciplines. And this is at a value of $2,500 each.
An online registration process was also added this year. The NIFCA Gala returns to its original home at the Garfield Sobers Complex in Wilde. In regional news now, Dominica is moving to reopen its airports to limited commercial flights in the next 7 days. The update was provided by Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt during an address to the nation last night. Efforts are also ongoing to have the island's port operational by next Wednesday. He says while power is returning to Dominica, the island is still a long way from full restoration.
But with the Princess Margaret Hospital now fully powered, we expect to have electricity slowly returning to adjoining areas, wider Roseau, and gradually to communities across the island. It is difficult at this stage to hazard a guess as to when full power will be restored in the country, but thankfully the process has started. Of course, I would implore residents to avoid the temptation of interfering with electricity lines.
Prime Minister Skerritt says respect for law and order has returned to that country after Hurricane Maria. Several people in the wake of the hurricane resorted to looting businesses, making off with food and several other items.
We were all deeply shocked and saddened by the looting that took place after Maria. There is no place for it, and we will have no tolerance for it. Thanks to the efforts of the local police, the regional security system, and defense forces from around the region, this situation has now been brought under control. Nevertheless, we shall keep the curfew in effect for the time being.
Further afield now, anger is mounting in Mexico City in the aftermath of the recent earthquake, as evidence has emerged of failure to enforce strict building standards. More than 400 people died and about 150,000 buildings were damaged. Al Jazeera's John Hallman reports from Mexico City.
The earthquake left Martin's apartment with cracks so wide you can see through to the street. He and his family have been forced to evacuate for now. Mixed with his anxiety for the future is anger. His building is only 7 years old. He says it should have emerged unscathed.
I feel frustrated that what we have is all gone. I'm angry with the company that they didn't do what they promised. Angry with the authorities who didn't check that this was built according to regulations.
After parts of Mexico City were flattened by the 1985 earthquake, building protocols were tightened to stop the same thing happening again. But despite much stricter rules, several recently built apartment blocks collapsed or were badly damaged in last week's quake. Residents have been asking why. Earthquake and construction expert Edgar Tapia is checking damaged buildings for free. He says the rules do work, but in practice companies can ignore them to cut costs.
If they'd applied the rules, the new buildings would have performed better. Money plays a role. Sometimes the construction companies go for the cheapest option and look to lower costs to increase their profits.
We asked 3 construction companies, all of which built apartment blocks damaged in the quake, for interviews, but we got no answer. The head of civil protection in one of the hardest hit areas says that once building plans are approved by authorities, any deficiencies are the responsibility of those companies.
We take a break here, but sports news is next with Mart Seal.